The carbon cycle is an extremely significant cycle for Earth, as it is the main route of transfer of energy from one organism to another. The cycle also greatly impacts our atmosphere.
Photosynthesis is the first step in the global carbon cycle. Plants use carbon and atmospheric CO2 to make sugars and other carbohydrates to grow and reproduce. Plants are the basic building blocks of fuel as they act as the original source of food. Plants supply humans and animals with building blocks for molecules and fuel. In any ecosystem and food chain, the plant is usually consumed by animals. During photosynthesis in plants, the carbon in the atmosphere is taken in through tiny pores in the leaves of plants, and at the same time, oxygen is released into the atmosphere. All animals and humans have a function called respiration. Respiration makes two waste products, carbon dioxide and water. Animals remove carbon dioxide from their body when they exhale, and inhale oxygen released by plants. Another path that the carbon cycle can take is after the death of an animal or plant. When organisms die, their bodies, which include carbon, are broken down and consumed by decomposers. In this process, the decomposers release carbon back into the atmosphere. At the same time, the deceased plant and animal materials may also stay in the rocks, later being available as fossil fuel in the future for combustion. Over the course of humanity, mankind has built many factories and industries based on extracting fossil fuels and burning them to provide energy. The burnt fossil fuels include the deceased plant and animal materials and fossils that have died, as well as oil, coal, and natural gases. The process of extracting fossil fuels causes fossil fuel emissions. Fossil fuel emissions are the largest emissions of carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere and it accumulates in the atmosphere as plants are unable to use such high amounts of carbon dioxide in photosynthesis. The animals are eaten by other predators in the food chain. All humans and animals obtain food, specifically glucose, from plants in a food chain, as plants create their own glucose.
In the end, the carbon returns to the atmosphere after it has either been released through decomposition of living organisms or through human extraction of fossil fuels. The carbon cycle affects marine life as well. Carbon dioxide is able to enter the marine ecosystem where carbon is dissolved in the water. The carbon sinks very slowly and usually moves from colder areas to warmer areas, such as oceans near the equator. The deep, cold oceans do well to contain the carbon dioxide, but carbon dioxide tends to move towards warmer areas underwater. Carbon rises in the water when it comes into contact with warmer temperatures. At some point, the lake, ocean, or pond is unable to hold the carbon and releases it into the atmosphere in the form of bubbles. Photosynthesis also takes place in the marine ecosystem. In the marine ecosystem, instead of plants, oceans have phytoplankton and algae. They are the living organisms capable of photosynthesis. Phytoplankton and algae consume dissolved carbon dioxide in the ocean, and while they keep the carbon, they separate and release the oxygen from CO2. Sea creatures like land creatures also perform respiration. When the sea creatures are respiring, the carbon dioxide released through the respiration can go back to the phytoplankton and algae, or can dissolve into the deep oceans and be released later on back into the atmosphere. Marine life such as shrimp, shellfish, and small fish can consume the phytoplankton and algae, allowing the carbon to move up the food chain. The rates of the carbon cycle can take different amounts of time based on whether it is a slow carbon cycle, a fast carbon cycle, or a cycle based on human emissions. The slow carbon cycle is the process in which carbon moves between rocks, soil, ocean, and atmosphere. It takes around 100 to 200 million years for a complete cycle. On average, 10 to 100 million metric tons of carbon dioxide move through the slow carbon cycle every year. Human emissions are the second fastest method in which carbon moves around the Earth. Around 1 million metric tons of carbon move around the human emission cycle every year. The fast carbon cycle is the process in which carbon moves from one organism to another through photosynthesis, respiration, and consuming the carbon of one organism. 1,000 to 100,000 million metric tons of carbon move through the fast carbon cycle every year. Plants and phytoplankton are the most important organisms of the fast carbon cycle. With more plants and phytoplankton, more carbon can be moved over the course of a year in the carbon cycle. During photosynthesis and respiration, the time period of carbon being released and absorbed is extremely fast. Therefore, it is called the fast carbon cycle. As soon as the plants in land and water release oxygen, it is available to be inhaled by land or water organisms. When the living animals respire and release carbon, they are quickly absorbed by nearby plants. The carbon contained within organisms can last until they die. Carbon can last in organisms as long as they are alive, but during decomposition, carbon is released through a period of 8 to 12 years, which is the amount of time needed for decomposers to fully decompose the body. The lifetime in the air of CO2, specifically the slow carbon cycle, consists of 65 to 80% of CO2 and can remain in the atmosphere or in its dissolved state in water for around 20 to 200 years. When carbon is contained within the earth, it is the stage of the cycle where weathering, rock formation changes take place. This also includes rocks on the ocean floor. These processes take several thousands of years.
The carbon cycle is changing due to human effects on the carbon cycle. Some of these human effects are the burning of fossil fuels like coal and oil. Another action that humans do that creates more carbon is the burning of trees. Because of these actions, more carbons are moving up in the atmosphere and warming up the earth. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. It causes heat to be retained in the atmosphere. By increasing the amount of this greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, Earth is becoming warmer. Usually, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere can be taken in by plants through photosynthesis. But in recent years, the majority of the amount of carbon dioxide is unable to be taken by plants. Humans are not only releasing high amounts of carbon dioxide, but they are also cutting down trees and plants, which worsens the condition and make global warming an even bigger threat. At this point, there are already an abundant amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So even if people reduce releasing carbon in the atmosphere, the Earth will continue to warm. Climate scientists state that humans only have 20 years to make changes to the emissions of carbon we produce every year before it is too late. High emissions have been causing extreme droughts, devastating wildfires, massive floods, deadly hurricanes, and widespread famines.
The carbon cycle can be represented by a business company. The carbon starts from the plants obtaining carbon and releasing oxygen for animals. This can be modeled by how the company is started by the board of directors who control and manage the company and maintains the shares of the company. This is similar to photosynthesis, as plants control how oxygen is released into the atmosphere and maintains the balance in the ecosystem. The employees in the company do their jobs and increase the profits for the company. The profits go to the company, and to reward the effort of the employees are paid with a portion of the shares of the company. This models the exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen between plants and animals, as the board of directors need the employees to make a profit, and the employees need to be paid in return for their work. The fast carbon cycle is when carbon passes through one organism to another, starting from plants. The finance department manages payroll, the amount that the company needs to pay its workers. The employers get paid, and they redistribute a portion of their pay to their employees. This shows how the money is passed down from one person to another, and models how carbon is transferred from one organism to another. The slow carbon cycle can be associated with the shares of the board of directors. The board may want to save their money instead of investing it. Therefore, they may keep the money and save it without using more than necessary. This relates to the slow carbon cycle, as the process takes a long time, and most of the carbon stored in the earth stay in the rock formations over thousands of years. Human emissions can be modeled by investments. The board may want to invest in projects in other branch companies in order to make more interest and company profit. Investments are usually in large sums of the board members' shares, and if successful, results in high amounts of profit. The profits are not immediate, but they accumulate over the course of several years. This relates to the carbon cycle, as while human emissions are not as fast as the fast carbon cycle, and not as slow as the slow carbon cycle, it still releases a lot of carbon dioxide, which is reflected in the high profits. When organisms die and are decomposed, some of the carbon may not be released in the atmosphere. Instead, they are stored inside the earth. This models how employees get fired and take their money with them, and the money is enabled to be used by the company or the board of directors.